Hey guys, in this episode we wrap up our discussion of concept formation from Chapter 3 of Leonard Peikoff's Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, Concepts as Devices for Achieving Unit Economy. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've gotten to the last section of Chapter 3 on concept formation, and here we talk about the purpose, the primary function of concepts. So let's just go over what Leonard covers. What Leonard stresses is that concepts are devices for unit economy. He starts out with an experiment that Ayn Rand talks about with crows, where what we learn is that crows can perceptually discriminate between a certain number of entities, human beings in this case. I think it's 5, but after 5 that just stands for many. And the wider principle here is that consciousness at every level has a specific identity. It is limited, and it's limited in the number of perceptual units it can discriminate in one frame of awareness. And in order to go beyond this, then, we need the power of concepts. Concepts allow us to go beyond what we can discriminate perceptually by turning an unlimited number of units into a new mental unit, that we condense all men, past, present, or future, into the concept man that stands as one mental unit in our mind, and therefore condenses and liberates our mind to be able to deal with an unlimited number of units. And so, whereas other thinkers had described concepts and their function as time savers, and the idea here is that, well, if you had infinite time, you could just go around and instead of saying, man has 10 fingers, you would say Don and Leonard and Bob and so on all throughout history, and that the only limitation we have on doing that is time. But Leonard points out that no, the actual limitation there is that by the time you got to your 10th man, and probably before that, you'd have forgotten everything that you knew about the first, and so on. And so what concepts are not time savers, they're space savers. They save mental space. And you can just think, this isn't a great analogy, but imagine if every physical object you could fold into like a little point and tuck in your pocket. Like, this would be an incredible superpower to have, in that you could take everything with you anywhere you wanted to go, and in effect multiply that by an unlimited number. And that's what you're doing. You're saving mental space so that you can deal with reality at a much larger scale. And so what Ayn Rand does is she takes that idea that a picture is worth 1,000 words, which is certainly true. It's true when you're trying to get a concrete in all of its specificity and all of its concreteness. I think Leonard once gave the example of like trying with words and concepts to describe Greta Garbo's face. You could go pages and pages and pages and never get the richness and concreteness that you get from a picture. But Ayn Rand makes a point that also a concept is worth 1,000 pictures. That is, what is condensed into a concept is an unlimited number of concrete instances that then allows you to deal with them. And it's not just first-level concepts that are allowing us to economize on units. Definitions, as we talked about, are economizing. Mathematics, Leonard points out, is economizing. You can just take an example like, imagine 10 plus 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 10. I think I got that right. We economize that. We condense it into 10 times 10, which simplifies and frees us up to engage in further operations. And so you see condensation all throughout math. And then higher level concepts. This is further condensing knowledge so that man is a concept, one mental unit that stands for all men, past, present, or future, but we can integrate man and dog and cat into animal. And now we've condensed an even wider number of entities, of units, into a single mental unit. Then we turn after that to the point that concepts are serving a human function. They're serving a human need, but that does not make them arbitrary. It doesn't make them subjective, because it's serving that human need based on actual facts, based on the similarities and differences in reality, that things share characteristics and different measurements. And this is really going to get cashed in on in the next section when we talk about objectivity and the objectivity of concepts. But for here, it's just stressing that there's both a human need, but it's a human need that we are able to take advantage of because of certain facts. And then finally, Leonard makes the point that this, economizing on units is something that goes much further than just the stuff that we're talking about within concept formation. He gives the example of literary style and the way in which a thinker like Immanuel Kant is deliberately overwhelming our ability to condense units and therefore to understand the world. So that wraps up chapter 3 on concept formation. Now, we're going to talk about concept formation more in the next chapter, but what we'll see is that this is really the focus of this chapter, is sort of laying the groundwork for guidance. This is telling us what concepts are, how they are formed, and now we're going to get into, well, what do you do at the conceptual level? What are the norms that should guide us in forming concepts and more broadly thinking at the conceptual level, which would also include thinking in terms of propositional knowledge, in terms of generalizations. And so you can think of this as the kind of bridge between metaphysics and epistemology as a normative science, is that we have free will, we have a conceptual level that needs to form concepts in a certain way. Well, how do we actually do that? Now, one point that gets stressed when Ayn Rand covers this issue in Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology that Leonard doesn't stress is the issue of automatization. That the reason the concept 5 can allow us to condense units, allows us to economize, is that we automatize its meaning. We automatize that this stands for, if I don't have anything in front of me, but 5 pencils, but we don't have to bring to mind the image of 5 pencils or 5 flowers or something. That knowledge of what 5 references are automatized. And she gives a similar example with justice, is that we don't have to recreate all of the considerations that went into forming the concept justice in order to be just. We just have to set as the goal, okay, I'm a juror, I need to be just. I need to make this decision justly. And if we really have that concept, we've automatized its meaning, and that brings in automatically a context. That what learning is, she says, is it's a process of automatizing stuff that we have to learn through deliberate effort so that it's available to us automatically as a context. And that's what gives knowledge its power. It gives it its power because it's freeing us up. And when you have an automatized context there, it frees you up then to go on and gain later knowledge or to apply your knowledge to a specific instance. And if we don't have that, if our concepts are not grounded in reality and automatized, what we have are in what Ayn Rand calls floating concepts. So this doesn't come up in this section, but I think it's a helpful perspective to have. And some concepts, I think, are just completely cut off in people's mind from reality, that they're woozy, floating. They don't actually have any real content to them. In Objectivism, just a few examples that I think are commonly stand as floating abstractions are things like metaphysical value judgments or the primacy of consciousness, which is, if you remember, I gave a lot of examples when we did that, precisely because it's an area where we tend to treat it tend to hold it as a floating abstraction. Psychoepistemology would be something, you could really, the list goes on. Sometimes it's even more familiar concepts can be floating. Something like integrity. If you think, I can't really bring to mind units of integrity, they seem to be mostly examples of honesty or something like that. And so we really want to work to tie our concepts to reality. We talked a little bit about how to do that when we discuss definitions. We'll have a lot more to say in the upcoming chapter on objectivity, which is a lot of it is focused on how do you actively work to tie your knowledge to concretes, to the world that you have access to directly through perception. Now, there's also such a thing as partially floating concepts. And this is where, we said that knowledge is when you've automatized awareness and it's available as a context. And there is such a thing as semi-floating knowledge, which you could recreate the context with effort. You could say, primacy of consciousness. What was that? Oh, it was, all right, you're putting consciousness first, and some examples. I guess Religion would be an example because they're treating God's consciousness as shaping the world. And I think there was something about Hume, or was it Hegel? Or Descartes was, in other words, you can kind of struggle and recreate the process. And the point here is that is not what it means to know something. If you're in that state, you don't know it. Now, that's not a crime, but if you want that knowledge, then you want it automatized, because if it's not automatized, you can't use it in your thinking. It will not actually be active when you're trying to apply anything that depends on that. And so to me, this became very real, where I have done some number of debates, and what would sometimes happen, and this would become extremely uncomfortable, is that in the course of the debate, the other side keeps asserting its context. Let's say, the virtues of the welfare state. And I had not fully automatized both their context and mine. And when you're in a debate and you're trying to follow what the other side is saying, and that's causing you to lose your context and trying to recreate the steps by which you got the full injustice of the welfare state, that is hopeless. You're not going to get anywhere with that. And the point is not that you need to automatize knowledge for polemics, but it just made it very viscerally real that no, I didn't fully know this to the core. If there's any point I'm having to recreate it in the course of the moment, that it needs to be automatized. And if you're actually going to debate, you want to have automatized insofar as possible the other side, your knowledge of and understanding the other side's context. One of the things that a really good example of this is Jordan Peterson did an event with the Ayn Rand Institute. Yaron Brook and Greg Salmieri were on stage. And one of the things that I noticed was that Greg was very good at being able to engage with Peterson. And what jumped out is that Greg both had a very clear understanding and automatized understanding of the objectivist epistemology, and also had a very clear automatized understanding of broadly, not Peterson's view in particular, but he could get, Peterson's just giving a variant of pragmatism and the pragmatist view of concepts. And so was able to kind of have this very effective dialogue on those issues in a way that if I had been up on that stage, the points Greg was making were familiar to me, and I would be completely clear on those, but trying to connect that to an alien context that I hadn't either understood or automatized, and certainly hadn't spotted that, what Peterson was doing was invoking kind of pragmatist view of concepts. It would have been a really ineffective sort of presentation. So the wider point here is that you want to be very attentive when you find yourself thinking through like an objectivist idea, and it's not instantly available to you as a context. If it's not automatized, that's no sin, but that's an area where you can really benefit from going through the steps of making it automatized. And how do you do that? Well, part of it is what we've talked about in definitions. So if you're talking about automatizing a concept, say unit economy, going through the process of definition, as we talked about, of really isolating the units in contrast to what we're differentiating them from, picking out the essential distinguishing characteristic, identifying, in other words, the genus and differentiate, not just naming them, but thinking them through and validating, this really is the genus. Yes, this really is the fundamental distinguishing characteristic that will stand as the essential. That if you actually go through that whole process, you'll be, let's call it, way down the football field towards the end zone in terms of achieving automation, and then applying it, and integrating it to your other knowledge, things that we're going to talk about as we go along. This will go a long way to automation. There's a lot more to say about that. Some great advice I think comes up in Harry Binswanger's courses on psychoepistemology, and I think other courses where he's talked about like how we really solidify and automatize our knowledge. And sometimes just sheer memorization can be really helpful here. So not memorization without understanding, but for example, I think it's really useful to memorize some of Ayn Rand's key definitions. You should go through the process of understanding them, but then just sitting and pausing and, going through the same process that you did in grade school where you learned your times tables. When you learn your times tables, it's not that you're just blindly rote memorizing something. It's that you understand the concept. You get, 2 plus 2 plus 2. I understand that. Well, all 2 times 3 is saying is this is a condensed way of, it's an economized way of saying the same thing. But then I just have to remember 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 3 is 6. And now it's available to you automatically, and you can do more sophisticated math that you would not be able to do if you just remember, 2 times 3 is the same as 2 plus 2 plus 2. So I guess 2 times 3 is 4, 6. 2 times 3 is 6. You would never get anywhere. And so it's the same idea with concepts and important ideas in philosophy is once you get them, once you grasp them, committing it to memory is super, super valuable. I want to talk about this then in the context of the whole purpose of OPAR. So when Leonard wrote Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, his goal was to get objectivism between 2 covers. That is, to give us the total of the philosophy in terms of essentials. And he even made the point that so that you could hold it in and actually see it as a philosophic framework that's going to apply to everything. And he even made the point that, he could have written much faster a multi-volume series on the philosophy, but the real challenge was getting what are the essentials and how to organize them. And so one of the great assets of this book is precisely that each section, and we're going through section by section, each section is titled in the form of a principle, and the principles are organized hierarchically. We're getting the logical order in terms of the principles. And so it's really valuable to go step by step through each section and really think it through and try to, how does this apply to different things and all the things we're doing in order to deepen our understanding of the section. But it's also useful then to economize units, to condense it, and to remember the principle. And in fact, I would highly recommend as an exercise going through and, as we go along, turn to the table of contents, and in the same way you would memorize times tables, once you understand what an actual what multiplication means, is going through and memorizing in order all the key principles of objectivism from the table of contents, because that's going to help you retain the total and have it available automatically as a context. But even within there, it can be really helpful to condense that. And so one way I think about where are we right now, well, we've started with existence exists, and the act of grasping that fact implies a corollary axiom that consciousness exists as the faculty of awareness, of grasping what is, and that on the perceptual level, that's done automatically, that we directly perceive concretes, entities, a world of entities, but that what our volition entails is grasping grasping concepts, grasping relationships among concretes, and that we do so by differentiation and integration based on same characteristics, different measurements, and that we retain then these concepts through definitions that recapitulate the concept formation process. So I think that kind of approach allows us to hold in a more direct way the way in which concept formation is tied ultimately back to the most basic axioms of something is, and I have to be aware of it. And I think from time to time we're going to do that. We're going to try to get the through line so that ultimately by the end we'll be able to see the whole of objectivism flowing out of the basic axiom, its starting point, existence exists. That's it for this video. We will jump in next time to objectivity. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like this video, hit that bell so you do not miss a thing. And as always, the best way to stay in contact is to go to donswriting.com and sign up for the newsletter. Talk next time.